Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar entitled Manage Records in Email and Microsoft Teams as part of a holistic records management solution. This is the fourth of was originally a four-part webinar series centered on records management. And now we've continued that, and we've got a slide in here where we're going to share with you the webinars that have been added to the series, and we hope you'll join us for those as well. Next slide, please, Jim. My name is David Kruglove. It didn't advance. I don't know on my screen, Jim. There we go. Okay, my name is David Kruglove. I'm Managing Director with Share Squared. I'm joined by Ron Johnson, who is the Vice President of Customer Success for Harmony, and Jim Duncan, our Chief Architect, who, if you've been on some of these webinars, you already know is a SharePoint Certified Master. These guys will do the technical stuff. I'm gonna do some overview and just catch people up a little bit, and then we'll jump in. And most of the plan for today is demos and things like that, so it won't be talk track for me too much. The agenda is I'll do a brief overview, just one slide on the prior webinars and some of the webinars that are coming up, and then we'll talk about Capstone, for email retention, taxonomy, and that's kind of a specialty of ours, and you may have seen bits and pieces of that in some of the other webinars we've done, but you're going to get a different cut of it this time. We're going to be talking about functional and topical based taxonomy. We're going to do an overview, so to speak, of Microsoft Teams, because what we're hearing is that a lot of customers just sort of consider it as a replacement for Skype, which it is, but there's a whole lot more functionality there. And we're going to do a particular use case that is an organizational change management portal that Share Squared created sort of as a product to help our customers with projects that they're doing. We're just using that because it's a kind of a creative example of how you can use Teams. And so you'll see pretty much all the features in play there. And then we'll turn things over to Ron, and Ron is going to show you how Harmony provides a better way to classify and store email records, attachments, and deal with Teams content. And there just isn't a lot of governance or control there yet from the Microsoft side. So Harmony is an add-on product that we have worked with a fair amount. And one of the great things about Harmony is that there's almost no learning curve. It shows up in Outlook, and most people understand it right away. And there's really not a lot of services with it. So we are a services organization. We, help implement tools like Harmony and do training. But in the case of Harmony, there's very little services. It's really sort of install the product and run with it. So, and then we'll do the closing and an extended QA that will last 15 minutes. And we'll try to answer some questions. And I've been promising that we would publish all the questions for all the webinars. And quite honestly, we had about 70 questions last time. We didn't get them out. So we're going to do that at the end of this webinar. It will take some time. It's probably going to be next week, but we'll get all the questions published to you and sent out to everybody who registered, probably to all the webinars, in just one Q&A set. Okay, Jim? Okay, so we always like to set an intention for the webinar, and we really want people to get excited about the technology, Microsoft Teams. Of course, we're continuing to explore how you can use Office 365 for a records management solution, or EDRMS, if you don't know that term, is Electronic Document and Records Management System. We're going to present some ideas that we hope are new for you about managing email. And as I said, we'll talk about Microsoft Teams and how you can manage records or file documents that are in Teams. Overall, our sort of commitment is to foster a community of people like yourselves that are interested in the technology. And, we encourage you to participate by asking questions or sending us emails, or, there's a call to action slide at the end where you can get a hold of us and have do some brainstorming, have an extended conversation about a project, get pricing, talk about a proof of concept. So we're trying to foster this community. We're not asking for anything, other than, if we can help, reach out to us. And of course, we want to answer your questions. So throughout this series, we get questions like, well, who is ShareSquared? And I don't want to spend a lot of time on it. So there's one slide. We are a solution provider, always focused on the SharePoint and Office 365 platforms, founded in 2004, actually. And we mostly work with, as you can imagine, collaboration, internet, records management, workflow, content migrations from file shares and other systems like OpenText or Documentum, FileNet, things like that. And we're also a reseller and an implementation partner for the products listed below, which include Harmony, and last webinar we had Gimel on. So if you are interested in the products that you see on one of our webinars, we would appreciate it if you reached out to us for pricing and implementation information and things like that. We typically try to provide a discount when we work directly as the partner with a customer. So reach out to us if you need any information about these products. There are some others too that we work with that aren't listed here, like ShareGate and some others, but anything related to Office 365 or SharePoint. Okay, so the prior webinars, if you missed them, there's going to be a link in here. There's a link in the email that you got that had you register today. That is back to our website where the recordings and the presentations are there for you to download. This webinar will be recorded, and we will do the same thing within a couple of days. We'll put the presentation, the recording on our website. You'll get a follow-up email with a link to that information. So if you don't need to ask that question, that's been answered. The webinars were, the first one focused on developing an effective RIM program and a retention schedule, sort of a modern day retention schedule. Featured a guy named Bruce Miller, who people who are in the records management world know well. Then Jim and I tackled managing records in SharePoint and Office 365, and we showed all the reasons why you might want to use Office 365 for a records repository. But then when we got to the actual records management features, we sort of resolved that it's not quite there yet. And so the next one, the next webinar, the third one, we partnered with Gimel on to show you how you can still use it as a records repository, but then you would use an add-on like Gimel to manage records in different repositories, Office 365, OneDrive, file shares, even OpenText, Box, and other repositories, all in one dashboard in one place with the same set of policies and rules. And then today, of course, we're talking about managing email, and we added the Microsoft Teams content. That's a feature that Harmony has as well. And of course, people are very interested in that right now. If you follow the link in the email that went out, Teams has grown unbelievably. I think that email talks about 75 million daily active users. It was something like 33 just a couple of months ago. So tremendous growth, which of course means people are using the platform and storing documents there, which represent records, but how do you deal with that? So that's what Ron's gonna tell us about. And then these other webinars are upcoming. You'll get links to them. There were links in the email that previously went out, and those will be out again. So sign up for whatever you can. We'd love to have you. All right, so now we're gonna do a poll, and we're trying to get a sense of how people are using Teams currently. And oh, what happened to it? There we go. Okay, so I'm gonna launch the poll, give you a few seconds to fill it out, and then we'll close it. So are you, essentially using it for virtual meetings and calls, so that replacement for Skype? Are you doing chat and instant messaging? Content organization, we're saying, are you using teams and channels within Teams to organize the chat, the meetings, the calls, the documents, all the different things that go together, that are related but coming from different sources in a way, or they're different types of content, so a chat versus a document. And then you'll see in our demo that you can do navigation for related applications and really kind of build a user experience overlay on top of what are called Office 365 groups and all the content and features that are part of a group. And then some people are not using Teams. So let me show the results here. All right, So 70%, you know, kind of getting forced into this. Microsoft is sunsetting Skype. 70%, that's kind of expected. 60%, that's also the Skype piece. And then you see it sort of trails off after that. A lot of people not using Teams. Obviously, there are choices for this technology, so that makes sense too. We're going to delve into a Teams demo that will show you all these different features and maybe spark some ideas on how you might use Teams going forward. Okay, so this is a slide about Teams, and then I'm going to do a little bit on the capstone piece and the taxonomy piece, and then we'll get into the demos. So as I mentioned, the first thought, the first sort of big workload that's being tackled is as a replacement for Skype. So doing, we do all of our internal meetings and all of our customer meetings. We record all the sessions, so we do working sessions, we do scrum calls, things like that. And if you were on a webinar we had about project portals a couple months ago, each customer gets a project portal and we store those recordings to the portal. So it's kind of nice if somebody misses a meeting, or if it's 6 months later and it was a training session, someone can go back and review that meeting. So we do that all on Teams. The recordings go into what, the technology called Stream. And obviously we use it for chat and phone calls and things like that. The end of life for Skype is July 31st, 2021. So there is some urgency to move. And what we've noticed, I think, I can't confirm this, that the infrastructure for Skype is maybe being repurposed or decommissioned or repurposed for Teams, because when we've had a customer force us to get on Skype, it just seems underpowered in some ways. So all the money, all the effort is on Teams, so you want to move as soon as you can. So what's a team? So it's Microsoft calls it a user experience. We kind of see it that way too, but the important part is it's this graphical kind of overlay. It's an application that sits on top of an Office 365 group and extends those capabilities. And the most interesting part is that it aggregates and contextualizes the different types of content and their sources, right? So what does that mean? Well, when I would chat in Skype before, say with Jim, we might be chatting about a particular customer project. And that chat lived in isolation. It wasn't tied to the project in any way. It was just the only sort of metadata about it was that it was between Jim and me. We were talking. When you're chatting within a team, it's contextualized, right? So if we're in a team that represents that particular project, then all that chat goes there. All of the activity alerts that go on happen in that channel. The documents are stored there. So it aggregates, it pulls together these different pieces of content. The documents actually live in the Office 365 group, but I can see them and work with them within the team. So it aggregates and contextualizes them around whatever that topic is. And a channel could be really anything. It doesn't have to be a project. Jim may show some of the different teams and channels that we have, but our use case is going to be around organizational change management. So it could be kind of anything. Teams are subdivided into channels, and channels can each have their own planner plan, and they, it's sort of like, think about TV the way it used to be, at least. It's a little different now, but where you turn it on and you tune to different channels, and then you get to ESPN, and sort of everything in that channel is about sports. So you can have different channels within the team to divide the content, and again, further segregate or aggregate, contextualize that content. The channels can have navigation to related applications. You're going to see that in the demo. And it has things like the activity alerts, like tasks from Planner, calendars, documents. And so it's a great interface to get sort of sit on top of what was getting a little unwieldy in terms of content. Jim, next slide. Okay, so the records management people know about Capstone. It's nothing new. It came out in August of 2013. There was an implementation deadline for the federal government for December 31st, 2016. In some ways, as we develop this, we're not comparing apples to apples when we talk about the kinds of taxonomy we build and Capstone, because they're not the same thing. But the primary goal was to ensure that email records that are supposed to be kept permanently are preserved. And I think Capstone was pretty brilliant, big bucket kind of way to do that. And it's based on organizational role. So board member, officer, field worker, all different kinds of sort of value, importance, liability related to the content they're generating. So the C-level people, those executives, they're generating content in email that is, highly valuable, probably carries a higher level of liability than a field worker in general. So Jim's going to demo all of this for you, and we'll show you how you can implement these policies in Exchange. The pros are that it works great for broad-based retention management. We don't really consider it records management because it doesn't align with the record categories in your retention schedule, but it's easy to implement. What we're going to show today is it's done server side in Exchange, so you don't, there's nothing on the client side that has to be installed or done. There's no end user involvement. It is specifically and only tied to the role of the person within the organization. The cons are it's only for email, but that was the intention, right? So it's not tied to specific record categories. It doesn't deal with documents. The metadata is the typical metadata for an email, right? So sender, recipient, date, things like that. And then you've got the body, which is what we call unstructured content. So it is searchable in Exchange and in SharePoint using full text indexing, but it's not as usable from a records management standpoint. I can't tie a policy to a date that's embedded in an email. That's not helpful for me. I can't develop a workflow around an email where the data that triggers the workflow is embedded in it. So we call it unstructured content. Not as useful, and not as useful for findability because at least in Office 365 and SharePoint, the search refiners are tied to the specific columns of metadata. So if I wanted to find all invoices and then refine by ShareSquared invoices and refine by the year 2018 and so forth, I have to have discrete columns or fields of metadata. And when the information is embedded in an unstructured document, it just doesn't do me any good. So, but that's not what Capstone was for. So we're not knocking it. It was a great idea to kind of get a handle on billions of emails. So good idea. We're go ahead and go to the next slide, Jim. We're really recommending that you approach email management and Teams content management from both perspectives, right? So for email, we'd say, yeah, do Capstone. Why not? It's easy, and at least you're not going to delete emails that should be kept permanently or should be kept for a period of time based on someone's role, but also address your records management needs using what we call a functional taxonomy and topical taxonomy. So I'm going to just define those. I took some time to try to get this into the easiest form I could think of, but a functional taxonomy is based on the function the record performs. Now that sounds, sort of almost circular, right? But when you see the examples, they make sense. So the functional taxonomy aligns with your record categories. So I said invoice or contract, employee record, asset, permit, all those things. They have a particular purpose, and they probably have an entry in the retention schedule. So in SharePoint, it's typically implemented as what's called a content type. That is a structure to hold metadata. There are some built-in content types, for example, the document content type, but it has very little metadata. It's sort of when it was last modified and things that you would normally find with a document. We typically extend those out-of-the-box content types to build things like contracts and invoices. And so the functional part of that is a contract is kind of like its definition, right? It's a written or spoken agreement concerning employment, sales, tenancy that's enforceable by law. That's what a contract is. That's its functional taxonomy. That's its functional role, similar for invoice. And then the topical taxonomy is the actual metadata for a specific contract or a specific invoice, right? So, and that metadata is stored in the fields of the content type. Again, that content type is just a structure to hold the metadata. Metadata gets stored into those fields, and you see the extent, the rest of the example is the contract type, its effective and end dates, the parties that are involved, or the invoice vendor, due date and amount. And I said earlier that when that information is in an unstructured document, it's not very useful to us. But as soon as we pull it out and use it in a functional and topical taxonomy, now we can do things like have a workflow where an invoice, let's say it's a scan operation. We scan an invoice, we OCR it, we pull out the amount, we put that amount and the vendor and the due date into the fields of a content type, and then we can kick off a workflow that routes that invoice for approval to one group if it's less than $5,000 and another group if it's more than $5,000. So that metadata is something that we can operate on, unlike the unstructured content. So we're saying, when dealing with this email and Teams content, use both strategies. Use Capstone as your broad bucket approach. Develop a taxonomy that addresses the functional and topical parts, and then you can have more findability. You'll be able to do workflows and things like that with it, and then you'll see that Harmony helps you do this, right? Straight from Outlook, you can add that kind of intelligence to the taxonomy that makes the whole thing work. Okay, so Jim is up now. I'm gonna shut off my mic for a little bit, or I may jump in and help him at times. And we're gonna start with looking at how we implement Capstone. If you've been on some of our other webinars, you'll see a trend. We tend to use Excel as the design and the information or the inputs into a deployment, whether that's project portals or taxonomy, or in this case, implementing Capstone. So we start with Excel as the inputs in the way we design and have the conversation with the customer, and then we have a deployment utility that deploys and actually configures whatever it is we're configuring, in this case, Capstone, in Exchange. So go ahead, Jim.
Thanks, David. As David said, we start with an Excel workbook. This is an example. This provides the Capstone approach. Each row in this table represents a role and the various settings related to how their content, and by their content I mean documents in their OneDrive and items in their Exchange mailbox, whether they're emails or calendar items or task items or whatever we decide to include in our policy. And then for each of those collections of content, what does the retention look like based on their role? So as an example, if we look at board members, any content that they have generated or that they store in their OneDrive, if they had one. So interesting to point out in this particular scenario, board members are not provided with a OneDrive of their own. We're assuming that they're managing their documents, their personal documents on their own, and will only participate in document-based workflows somewhere else outside of their OneDrive. So we don't give them a OneDrive, but we do give them a mailbox, and we say that all of their messaging should be related to their role as a board member for our organization, and all of their email will be kept permanently. Now, for a desk worker, as we've called it here, their content by default is protected from anyone outside the organization, but they're allowed to share with people inside the organization. Board members' content in their email, really restricted. Really only they have access to it. And then there's a few different ranges in between. When it comes to OneDrive, officers and executives, their OneDrive content will be kept permanently, and their email will be kept permanently. Now, that doesn't mean that they can't delete things from their OneDrive and delete things from their mailbox, but we'll have a preservation hold copy of it somewhere. So they need to know about that. Whereas a desk worker, it's just 5 years for their documents, it's 7 years for their email. And there's more settings here. So as we're configuring the policies and the labels and the different things that are related to OneDrive and Exchange, we can, for instance, set a quota on their OneDrive. We can configure what kind of sharing they're allowed to do outside of the organization. and again, their default retention. And then for Exchange, we can specify just a specific folder if we want to. So if we want a different policy for deleted items or drafts or their calendar items, we just add a row and select that as the email folder and specify that, the policy for that particular folder. In this one, after 5 years, we're going to automatically trim things out to their archive mailbox if they haven't deleted them. And then permanent storage for those or long-term storage for those is based on this column here. So all of this, information is gathered through, whatever meetings we need to have and conversations that need to be had. But we define our roles and all of their settings, and then we, on this other tab here, we assign them to specific users. So we list each person that we want to be assigned one of these policies, and we choose which policy we're going to assign them. And then with that, all that information in this workbook, we run that through a PowerShell script that goes out and actually creates the labels and everything that we need out in Office 365. So here I've transitioned over to the Microsoft 365 Compliance Center. I'm in the Records Management section, and we'll see that we have a OneDrive retention policy for each of those capstone roles that get a OneDrive. So going back to the workbook, board members and field workers do not get a OneDrive. So we don't need a OneDrive policy for them. And these are being automatically applied. And if we dug into the settings for these, we'd see that they're being applied to specific users. So just one for now for the demo. That's all based on this table here. So we're kind of in a testing mode, but once we make sure everything works, then we'll just populate this table with all of our other users and then run our script again, and suddenly these policies will apply to them as well. And that's the OneDrive side of it. Over in Exchange, we've got capstone policies for each of those as well. Looks like we've got duplicates. So one of these is going to be for their auto archive, and the other one will be for their long-term retention. And this is all automated from that workbook and the PowerShell script.
So we should use labels to differentiate those, right?
Yeah. Okay.
You ready to move on to the next demo, or are you? I'm sorry.
Yeah. So next up is the functional and topical taxonomy, right? So when it comes to personal documents and Exchange emails and a capstone approach, I don't know necessarily the function of the content. I don't know the function of the document. In OneDrive, you can do content types, but they've made it something that's a little more difficult to configure. You have to do it programmatically if you want to do content types and all that kind of stuff in OneDrive. And if you wanted to do topic-based retention in Exchange, like for this project, keep things this long, for this, you'd have to do that with labels on folders, and you don't want to, okay? But we know the function of the person that owns the OneDrive or the mailbox. We know the function that they provide to the organization, and we know on a capstone approach how to retain that content. But it would be very difficult to say that if the document in a supervisor's OneDrive is an employee review of a subordinate, keep it for 5 years, unless it has additional feedback from a background check or something like that, and really PII. So you could probably do it, but it's not the place to do that. Those kind of things shouldn't be in the OneDrive. And on an email, yeah, you can get the subject line, but I am notorious for changing the subject of a running conversation in email in the body of the email, but not updating the subject line of the email itself. Still says, read that thing we were talking about last week, even though we're now talking about something else in the same conversation. So you don't want to do that kind of topical identification and classification of things in OneDrive and Exchange. You want to do it in a more formal system. So that leads us over to information architecture. Did I capture the functional versus topical well, David? I mean, you did a great job, so I don't know how much I needed to add.
No, I think it's fine. I mean, I think we were gonna look at the incident report, and I think that's where you're going now. I also want to make sure we leave plenty of time for Ron, so we may skip the next poll, Ron, and just move to you. But yeah, go through this. I mean, this aligns with what I said, right? It's go ahead, Jim, and do it. Do it quickly, because you still have your Teams demo to do, and I think that's what people want to see too. So
got it. Okay. So information architecture is a little more complex, and by information architecture, for today's conversation, we mean site columns collected into content types, assigned to document libraries, with people putting content in and filling out forms. That's IA for today. It's a little more complex, so we don't start right from Excel. We start from PowerPoint, and we start from a PowerPoint presentation that represents an information architecture approach that we've built up over the years. And this is an example slide. It shows that we have a content type called incident report that has this metadata, which inherits from, it is a child of the generic share squared report, or company report, or Acme report, or whatever you want this to be. And that includes this metadata. So an incident report, an instance of an incident report will have a form to fill out that has these fields and these fields on it. Okay. And we start from this, and we make changes, and we add new content types, and we've got list-based content types, and all the way into governance documents, and even case management and document sets. So we start from there with PowerPoint, but then we get into Excel, and it's a similar concept, a lot more data in here, but we've got a table with all of our site columns in it, and we've got a table with all of our content types in it. In incident report should be here somewhere. Here it is. So it's a child of a generic report. And if we look at the column mappings tab, we'll see that the incident report has been mapped to, or all of those columns that I mentioned have been mapped to the incident report content type. And again, we have a utility that will read this Excel workbook and make all these changes on a site collection that it's pointed at. And the result of that is here. I'm in a library called Incident Reports on the team site of the customer relations team for our made-up company that has an intranet. And I've uploaded a sample incident report. And if I select it here, we'll see that it has business unit, document type, synopsis, document owner, true document date, and then more specific to an incident report. So those were all of our global columns, right? All of these over here. But then it also has the fields specific to what we call an incident report. The summary of the incident, who it was reported by, the location that it happened, the action that it was taken. And this is just what we typically see as common fields on every incident report content type we've run across so far. Each one might have had its own differences based on the customer But that's where at least we start from here, a common understanding of what an incident report is.
Jim, let's move to the OCM portal Teams tour demo.
All right, so
wrap it up in 5 minutes, and we will skip that next poll to give Ron more time.
Okay, good. So what do you want to talk about this one, David? This is the OCM portal team in Microsoft Teams.
Exactly. So we're trying to illustrate that Teams is more than just a replacement for Skype, right? So this portal that we developed came out of a couple customers asking us for something like this: is how do we socialize even before a project starts? How do we socialize the project's coming and what it's about, and when we're going to be working with specific business units, and when there are trainings available, and the documentation and training for the product. And so we use Teams for the interface for the curators of the content. So we give them this portal, and you can see what Jim is hovering over. Those are the channels. So we've got channels for learning, and why don't you click on one of those? And I mentioned earlier that you can have navigation to different applications. So this particular one is pointing to the Office 365 training on the Microsoft site. Now remember, I said Teams is a user experience. It's aggregating and contextualizing information. That's what I said, right? So the context of this particular team is organizational change management. So everything that is in here, and the channels, and which sort of subdivide the content, and the content on each of these tabs for each channel is all related to organizational change management. And I think if you go to the general channel, I think that's got a bunch of templates in it. Is that where they are? Yeah, so these are a bunch of, go ahead and click on that. These are OCM templates that we got from Microsoft. They're about 5 years old, and we updated them, but they're all the different, build a champions program, stakeholder engagement plans, things like that. So this is just kind of an interesting way to use Teams, and also to build an application. This didn't take a ton of time to build. I think the design of it is more time consuming than the actual implementation. So, you create a team called OCM Portal, and you create the channels underneath and give them names, and then you configure these tabs. And tabs can point to a document, as Jim's showing here, it's a spreadsheet. They can point to an application like a planner. So,
did you happen to notice the document that's here?
Right, that's a portal deployment, isn't it?
Yeah. So this is the workbook. Yeah. This is the workbook from which we build the OCM portal. Right. It's an Excel workbook. So if you don't, if something needs to be different, you don't want the news channel, then we just turn that row off in this workbook.
Yeah. This is specific to the way we do deployment. It's a share squared original. That's not a Teams feature, but and then so like down at the end, we've got user guides and software documentation, and there's surveys and polls. Click on the surveys and polls. I think that's kind of interesting. I don't remember which tab they're on though. So the good of it is the way that it aggregates this content, and as what we've been saying is Teams is much more than a replacement for Skype. You can see that it's an application that's pulling together content from the document library that's in the group. It's pulling together content on the web and certain documents, the activity feeds, so like a planner tasks and things will show up. All those kinds of things, and it's pulling it into this specific context called an OCM portal. So that's kind of really what we wanted to show. And why the good and the bad of this is that it's great, and it's emerging, and it's getting very popular, and it's getting better. It's still missing some governance pieces. So in our application, the consumers of this content use an Office 365 communication site, because any of the members of the team can actually change the navigation. So we don't want to open it up to a company of 1,000 people, to let them know about a project that's coming, have them come into Teams and have them make changes to this thing. That's not what we're trying to do. So this is just for the curator. So there's more to be done around governance in Teams from, that Microsoft needs to add, or third parties have to add. And then where we're transitioning to is managing that content, those documents in Teams, So you can put documents directly in and read them from there, and it's great. And Harmony's going to, Ron's going to show you how Harmony, adds the taxonomy and allows you to work from Outlook with that content. So it's going to be a more natural sort of evolution from people using Outlook to working with content in Teams, and then of course dealing with records, those documents that are in Teams, and how you can deal with those and get them under retention and disposition policies. So that's that. Jim, I think that if you go back to the presentation, I think we need to show Ron's slides. And Ron, I'm sorry we cut into your time.
No worries, Jim and Dave.
Okay, skip this, and then you're up.
All right. Well, thanks, guys. It's always interesting to see the level of detail and complexity there. And the nice thing about my role in this webinar here is that, and Harmony's role in the overall solution is that I get to show the easy stuff. And that's how we make this simple for the end user. So not the unimportant stuff, but it's really how do we bridge this? How do we take the information and the roles, the governance, the complexity of this, the retention policies, the content types, the taxonomy, all the fun stuff that Jim just covered and David covered. How do we bridge that work and that investment over to your end users? And how do we simplify their user experience so you can ensure that your business requirements are met? Okay, so and by reducing kind of the friction or resistance to change and technology that we have with all of our some of our end users jump on technology really quick, others it takes they come kicking and screaming over. But the goal of Harmony here is to empower your end users to bring it to their work environment, their comfort zone, and allow them to work in their native environments. And today, that native environment may be Microsoft Outlook and email. And as Jim and David mentioned, Teams is making a big splash in the market. So it's going to be moving. And as more and more organizations look to Teams and to expand beyond chat and web meetings on Teams, it's going to be more important to connect there. So again, as a quick introduction, this is Ron Johnson speaking. As Jim mentioned, I manage our customer success team at Harmony. So the slide that we have up right now is really a recap from the first webinar, and this information was presented by Bruce Miller. But the goal here is to really show the importance of email in any document management or record management solution. So emails are documents. Emails of value need to be captured and retained. And this goes beyond, as Jim showed with Capstone and all that. You can set generic or kind of standard retention policies and controls across OneDrive and Exchange and your folders and libraries in SharePoint. However, it's important that the end users are able to say, okay, this email is important enough, I need to reclassify this. I'm going to move this into a different system and apply a new retention label and maybe additional metadata, topical metadata, so that you can find and retrieve this information quickly. So the volume of email. So as we say, emails contribute about 80% of the overall information that needs to get captured. However, when you look at the volume of emails that we deal with, only about 5% of the overall emails need to be captured. So it's really important and extremely important that we empower end users with an efficient, quick way to be able to capture emails and documents and email attachments. Okay, otherwise this business information gets lost. Okay, so Jim, you can move, or David, Jim, you can move to the next slide. I think you got it. So, as we look at the challenges of email management, I think we can all relate to stories of, hey, I needed to make sure this email was available. And I know we skipped one of the polls. Maybe I'll throw an informal poll in there, but I know I have, and I know I've worked with organizations that have. Many people will take an email that they know is critical, that they need for an upcoming meeting or something, and forward it to their Gmail account, their personal account. Okay, this is kind of a rogue IT. We don't cover this one on that. That's one example of email challenges. And this gets back into kind of the Harmony tagline of how do we make the right thing to do the easiest thing? And really, when you boil down these 4 challenges that we're looking at, from my standpoint, my opinion, ineffective search and the inability to find content drives all the other ones. Okay, so if an end user, if your coworkers aren't confident that they can take that email and move it over to SharePoint or into a team and find it 8-10 months from now, they're simply not going to do it. They may do it, but they're also going to take a copy of that and put it on their network file share. They're going to put it in an Outlook folder, or as I mentioned earlier, they might just move it to, or forward it to their personal accounts. So as we look at that, the importance of taxonomy, the importance of classification of content becomes very important, and making it consistent. And that's where, making it efficient, easy to do is very important. Now, one of the ways that I think IT has approached this, and Jim covered this again with Capstone, is start to implement retention policies. So retention policies will help to motivate end users to comply, because now if I know my email is going to be archived or disposed of after a certain amount of time, I'm going to be a little more compliant or a little more motivated to be compliant and store that information the way the organization wants it and capture the additional metadata and classification they want. So that becomes important. The challenge I see, or what we've seen from clients, is that when you get into retention schedules, a lot of times they're overreaching. I actually worked with an organization probably 6-8 months ago. They had a 90-day no exception policy. You were not to move an email outside of Exchange. It was archived and deleted after 90 days. So people panic in that, and they will find, they're resourceful. Our end users are very resourceful. They'll find a way to save that information, whether it goes back to printing it off, they'll keep it. That is, the other action of that is that people over retain, and that is archive everything. And again, that gets into the inefficiency then of search. Is if we just archive it, are we capturing the additional metadata to help us find and search for that information, or are we just moving the problem to another date? So the goal of any email management kind of solution is to get the content into a shared repository out of our inboxes, so that it's collaborative, it's a resource for the organization, and it's accessible there. And that's where moving this content or moving emails, a good connection between Outlook and Exchange and Outlook and SharePoint, or SharePoint Online, is important. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump to the next slide there, Jim. Okay, so as we mentioned, any solution, and this is really the solution that Harmony delivers to your end users. It provides a simple, easy way to capture, classify, and then discover or find content that's on SharePoint. And when I say SharePoint, I'm meaning it in the term of SharePoint on-prem. It could be SharePoint Online. It could be the SharePoint document libraries behind Teams. It could be SharePoint, the personal site collection that is your OneDrive. So any of those portions of SharePoint. So when I use that, I'm kind of using the interchangeable to kind of our cloud versions, OneDrive, Teams, and all that. And we'll go through this in a demo in a second, okay? And as Jim showed, the important is, and I know he was going to show some of this, but the important of content types and organizing your metadata and taxonomy around content types, so that you can target things. Like if I drop something into an incident report, it captures, or there's default metadata that gets captured. Maybe there's workflows that fire because the new incident report was uploaded. All these things become important in that step of classifying. And when we can classify or capture and classify content, and we can automate it for the end users, it's even better. For example, from a Harmony standpoint, we have email header mapping that will automatically extract the important fields within an email, to, from, CC, conversation topic, lots of information, many more. And that information can get stored into metadata fields or columns in SharePoint, so that it can be easily searched and found, okay? And as noted, when we talk about this, so we noted the comfort zone, and the goal is to bring this all within inside of Outlook. Well, that's the world today, right? We focus, and we all probably spend way too much time with Outlook open and spending time in there, but it's important today to connect to our users in Outlook, and that's really what I'll show you in a little bit with Harmony. But as we move forward, Microsoft is changing things. Teams is becoming more and more. They're promoting Teams beyond what we know it for of a replacement for Skype, and chat and web meetings, but it becomes more of a front end to your SharePoint-based business initiatives, whether that's organizing information around insurance claims or court cases or projects you're working on, incident reports, accounts payable. Teams is becoming that interface where you can go to Teams and get to all the different applications and content. So as we move forward, it's going to be very important to extend it into Teams. Okay. Next slide, Jim. So as we move there, email management, we start to have some new challenges. And one is, basically what we've coined disconnected business conversations. Okay, so as with any new technology, there's always going to be a transition period. Some people using Outlook, some people preferring Teams. If you're like me, I switch between the two, and I find myself as a bad habit at times. I'll reply to all to an email in Outlook, and then I'll move it over to Teams. Okay, so how do we get this where part of the conversation is Outlook, part of it you're doing in Teams, and Microsoft, presents this as your inner loop and outer loop of communication, your internal and external communication. So how do we seamlessly allow people to move between the two? The other part of this is we all know from the reaction and addressing the COVID-19 issue and things that we're dealing with in the world today. Most people are working from remote offices and working from home today. So how do we capture, how do we make and simplify the idea of how do we make people, and I think the key is you need to be more self-sufficient. So I'm in my home office, and I don't know where my dog is today, but he's probably with my kids, but he's not very helpful in finding information. When we're in an office, we can always poke our head into somebody's office or find them walking by and say, hey, do you know where that contract is? Or I forget where we're putting that information. Is it on Teams? Is it on SharePoint? We need to make people be able to be much more self-sufficient. Okay, so again, that gets into getting people familiar with the tools, bringing the workflows and the work and the content to where they're comfortable. Okay, so when we get in, just to wrap up, and I'll jump into kind of the best practices here, and then we'll demo this for you so you can stop hearing me go through slides and all that. But really, it comes down to two principles. One, we need people to stay in their comfort zone. We need to bring the tools to them, make it easy, promote self-sufficiency in that. And we do that by not changing interfaces, not changing technology, but allowing them to use Outlook and use Teams, whichever their preference, and move seamlessly between the two. The other piece of that is the second kind of principle of this is that capture classify step needs to be, simple, just drop dead simple. It needs to be easy to basically comply with how the organization wants you to manage content, be able to have them really accept the fact that, hey, I'm going to move this content into, it's easy, it doesn't take any additional time. And even if it does take a little bit of time, I'm able to basically, I know the value of that. And the value of that is, the organization and myself, I'm going to be able to find it. And search becomes extremely critical. So let's go ahead, Jim or David, if you can make me a presenter real quick. I'll share my screen here.
I got it. I have made you presenter.
Okay, it's not showing yet. There we go. And you're gonna have to give me a second here. I'm gonna start it and stop it. Okay, so hopefully everybody is seeing my Outlook environment with a nice gentleman named Harmon Young there. So for those of you not familiar with Harmony, Harmony is this sidebar. So I'll just turn it on and off. And this is the main component and the component that most of our clients are using. We also have a web-based application for those running on Outlook on Mac or prefer to work in a browser. And we also have a mobile app for iOS and Android that kind of extends the experience to field workers and allowing them to capture images and things like that from the field and get it into SharePoint in an efficient manner. Okay. When you open up Harmony, you'll see here I am connected to this site called Ravenwood, and this is an Office 365 site. And right away, I have access to all my content within my OneDrive. I have content I can get to my teams and groups.
Hey, Ron.
Yes.
I don't know if it's impacting others in the call, but I'm not seeing your mouse move or anything. I'm seeing your virtual machine with Outlook displayed.
Okay. Are you seeing the movements when I move into Teams?
No.
Interesting. Let me share my screen again. I'll check the audience view real quick.
Okay, now I see it.
Okay, now it's moving. Sorry about that. So again, just to hit the rewind button, 10 seconds. You know, Harmony is this sidebar. It plugs into Microsoft Outlook, and this is really the app I'm going to focus on today. If you want more information on the web and mobile app, please feel free to reach out to us. When you connect, you have access to your SharePoint sites, so your traditional SharePoint sites. You can get to content on your OneDrive, and you can get to the content on Teams. Okay, and you can get to the team channels and all that. So just to continue a little bit of what Jim was showing, you know, I also connected to their environment, their demo environment, and I set a favorite here, and that favorite points out to their incident reports library. Okay, this is one of the channels. So if I have this incident report and I want to put it in that channel, it's as simple as a drag and drop operation. In this case, all the metadata is defaulting, so I don't get prompted for it. I'll show you that in a second. But now, if I navigate out there, and you know, I can see that now I've added that report, that incident report, alongside the sample report that Jim had showed earlier. So again, it becomes very easy for me to move content in there. I'm going to show a little different example on my environment, my demo environment. In this case, we have an email within it, the same incident report, and we don't want to just capture the email attachment. We want to move the entire conversation into Teams. Okay, so I'm going to go over here, and just by simply hovering over that channel or that team, I now see all my channels. And because this is a safety or an incident report, I'm going to simply drop that on the channel safety. And what's happening in the background is Harmony is uploading the attachment and the message, the MSG file, to the document library connected to that team. And in this case, we've added a little taxonomy. So this is what, you know, was referred to earlier as more of your topical based kind of categorization, where it's not just a project or an incident report. This is an incident report related to a specific project. And very quickly, I can just click on that. And now that's uploaded. If I wanted to add version comments, I can do that. So now that content is available. And the nice part of this is kind of the introduction of what we call Harmony Smart Assistant, is now I can go over here and say, put a nice little message here. It says, you know, safety, you know, repeated issue at, you know, Sam C, maybe the manager there, needs attention ASAP. Okay, so now that content or that conversation is moved to Teams for me. Instead of doing reply all and all that, I'm going to just open Teams up here, and if I go to my safety channel, which I'm in, and look at the post, you'll see that they're nice. They call this in Teams an adaptive card, but here's my custom post with a link to the MSG file, the email for reference, and also the incident report. Now that information and content is available directly here. So if I go in Teams, and I prefer working in Teams, I have access to that content directly in Teams. If I want to edit this, I just double click on it, view it. Same thing with the email. Okay. The nice part is, because I captured that email via Harmony, as I mentioned, has this email header mapping capability. So we extracted the contents or the header information from the email and stored it in and added it to that email message. So what that equates to from an end user standpoint is that I can switch here, and as Microsoft enhances the integration of SharePoint and this Files tab, I can switch this to an emails view and use any of views. And now I'm starting to look at this from an email perspective where I can go and start to filter on emails from, to, different things. And I have all the capabilities to sort, group, kind of set up and find that information. So again, I can very quickly move that conversation into a channel in Teams. Okay, so I'm going to switch back over to Outlook now and show that. And then again, just from the Harmony sidebar, I didn't have to go to Teams if I didn't want to, but you can see if I switch over here, I can again see that here's my incident report. And if I need to view that email, I just double click on it and open it. We also have a preview capability available. You see that there's a link to the attachment that was in this email. And I also have the email available where I can now, or the Word document, now I can right click and get to all my actions, including if the default or the container-based retention policy isn't the correct one, maybe this needs to be changed by the end user. So we can very quickly just assign a retention label to it. Again, this is all based off all the permissions and control remains in SharePoint in Office 365. So if I have that capability, then Harmony's going to enable me to do it. Okay. So as we mentioned earlier, search is key here, right? So there's lots of ways you can do column-based filtering up here, in here where I can go and say, just show me the email or documents modified. If I go into a different library, I'll show you this in a second, where you can group by and all that. But let's take a look at how search, and we can find this. So, you know, I could start just walking through this library. I can filter on, you know, or the document types, which is kind of content types. But let's go in here and do a search. And we're going to search on this word merger. But the first thing I want to show you is with Harmony 8.1, we've added the ability to do a search at the folder level. And in a Teams or a Microsoft Teams world, that's basically a channel with inside of the default document library that was assigned to that team. So now I'm going to do a search for merger, because I know that incident report, maybe I know there was a project going on or a merger or acquisition going on in the organization. Well, when I do this search in this channel, my content, I don't find anything related to it. So simply by clicking down here, I've expanded and did the search to the all the channels within inside this team. So now I can see that I found things in active project and bids related to this merger. And if I want to keep going, I could search any additional SharePoint sites that were added, libraries that were added to the default site collection for that team, or I can just continue up and search all my content. So now you're starting to see a lot of redundant information, but if I know I was looking for a message, I can then just go back and filter here and say, now I found the information I need. I'm going to just quickly open an email, open this back up. And now I want to take this, you know, email or the information and put it into a new email. Okay, so it becomes very easy to move the information back and forth into it. You right click, you can get all your typical actions of open and kind of open the container to get more. And you also get a little preview of the search capability down here. Now this was a pretty direct search. I was looking for something with the word merger in it. Okay, maybe let's go back in here and I'm going to navigate around Harmony with favorites. So I'm going to jump out to this team site. Let's go over to SharePoint a little bit. And I'm going to go into this one called Project Docs. And what I'm going to do is click here, and you can see this is again a new feature in 8.1 where I can now start to refine my search beforehand. So in this case, let's just use it so I don't mistype. I'm going to search for something with a Word document with the word incident in it. And again, here's the information came back. If I want to put this in an email or something, I just simply open a new email and drag and drop it in there. So again, it becomes very easy to kind of get my content. And when I show this, it's a lot of it is single operations. You can use multiple. You can grab multiple emails. You can move things off of your desktop in there and all that. All right, so I think Jim, David, I think that kind of puts us a little past the hour. Why don't we switch this over and answer any questions?
Yeah. Jim, if you can just put the presentation back up, I would appreciate it. I don't know if we really have 209 people still on or they left their screen up, but I want to say I love that demo. That was great, Ron. I wish we'd done it first now. I thought it was really impressive. So we may have to come back and do this again. Jim, are you able to yeah, okay. I just made you presenter. Sorry. And then I'll jump in with some of the questions. Let me pop this out. And okay, so let's go to the bottom and see if we've got some. Well, okay, so I'll answer some of the ones that I can just to be quick, but is the demo using a commercial or government cloud? The demos we did were in the commercial cloud, but it doesn't, there's nothing, I don't think, Jim or Ron, tell me if I'm wrong about this, there's nothing that we're doing that isn't supported in the government cloud. It lags about 6 months behind. Is that correct, or is there a relation there?
Yeah, and just to finish, from a Harmony standpoint, that is correct. We do need to complete some validation, and we are working with a couple of government clients that are helping us test in kind of GCC high levels and things like that, because your access or your URLs for getting to Teams and things like that are a little different in how you do consents and all that.
Got it. One of the questions I sort of alluded to earlier, but it says, how quickly do users adapt to using the Harmony add-on approach? And from our standpoint, and we're an implementation partner and a reseller, we do a little bit of training. Sometimes Harmony does some training, and they are off and running. Of the 10 or 12 products we resell, it's one of the ones that gets adopted the quickest. And my theory, and Ron, you'll probably confirm this, is just because it's in Outlook and everybody understands Outlook, and it feels like it's a part of something Microsoft developed, right?
Right. I think that to add to that, David, that you just get that intuitive drag and drop. In this case, I'm looking at a library that's organized by project, and it looks like folders, although it's using metadata, so it becomes very familiar for end users. I think if you want to understand more about the training requirements onboarding, we have some great customer testimonial videos on our website. And one thing I'll point out is, and I started the presentation, or my part of the presentation with this, the biggest challenge, but the biggest step in rolling out Harmony is kind of getting the email content type set up to capture that information, understanding your business requirements, all the stuff that Jim showed in the workbooks and how they simplify that deployment. So I think the combination works really well in helping them roll out.
Yeah, I agree. Perfect. Let me see if I can answer a couple of, what does RACI stand for? Jim, what does RACI stand for? I don't remember.
Responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's a standard chart. We have a document that we fill out for a lot of projects that it's just to identify the people that need to be communicated about the project, communicated to, and in what capacity. So are they decision makers or just people who need to be informed, that kind of thing. OCM is organizational change management, what I think used to be called kind of like training. It's a little more than training, but it's dealing with the change in the system, the technology, the culture, right? So a really good example is that people are very accustomed to storing documents on the file system, and I think Ron talked about earlier, forwarding emails around with attachments, right? And we're trying to, so it's not just training, it's a cultural change to get people to start to use the technology more effectively, because there's a lot of problems with email attachments. Now, Harmony does a really great job of making that easier to deal with, but it's still the best case scenario if you're using, say, Office 365, is to share the documents directly from the library they're in, and then we can have multiple people working them on at the same time. Everybody's got the most up-to-date document and so forth. So OCM, organizational change management, deals with all of that, from just, talking about the project, trainings, cultural change, rollouts, things like that. Let me see what else. We're still getting questions, so that's good. I haven't read this yet, so I'm just gonna throw it out there. How does records management work for actual chats and posts? Do we set a retention on the chats themselves with separate retention for the documents and libraries, teams, and SharePoint? That's a great question. That's from a customer of ours, Jim. So do a good job. No, go ahead. I think that's probably, well, either one.
You want to summarize it?
What's that?
You want to summarize the question and.
I think what we're getting is we know and have demonstrated that we can effectively deal with the retention for documents in libraries and in teams wherever they live, right? And that's part of what Harmony helps with. But I think the heart of the question is, how do we do records management for chats and posts and things like that within teams?
Yeah. So that's a relatively early thing to be looking at. It's a little bit younger, if you will, than all the retention management stuff that you can do for SharePoint and Exchange. But there are retention policies for chat, whether it's one-on-one chat or conversations within a channel. There is a way to configure that kind of thing. I don't know how granular it gets down to topic based. But the team provides your first level of topical information about the content, and then the channel defines the second level, and then the third level depends on what it is. And if it's a post, depending on the channel and the top and the team, maybe those get deleted rather quickly. I don't know. So
can you apply records management, retention, and disposition to chats and things like that? Or do you have to drag them?
So we can go look at it if you want.
Okay. I guess, well, that'll be part of our answer that we follow up with.
Yeah.
It's a great question though. Let's see. Is it easier to use Harmony when SharePoint is set up with teams or using all document libraries under one team? There's kind of two questions in there in a way, in my mind, but so let me take the second half first. It says using all document libraries under one team. As I mentioned earlier, and correct me if I'm wrong with any of this, Ron or Jim, but the teams it sits on top of, it's an overlay of it. It extends an Office 365 group, which has its own set of features, one of which is a document library. And you can, I believe can you have multiple libraries in a group, right, Jim?
Yep.
Yeah. So that's a natural. We use groups for, as a natural security boundary and content kind of organization structure along business unit lines, project teams, things like that. Could be a committee or a board, because the members of the team, of the group rather, are the only ones who have access to that content unless it's explicitly shared elsewhere. So if you've been on some of these webinars before, you've heard me talk about my HR example, and in HR I have my payroll, training, benefits, and a policy group, and only the people in the payroll group, Office 365 group, have access to that content unless they decide to publish it or share it. And so again, teams extend and sit on top of an Office 365 group and provide that that additional layer of user experience, is how I put it, and that's like how Microsoft puts it. So you don't have just one document library in general. You're going to have lots and lots of document libraries in an enterprise implementation, and then so that was sort of the second part of the question that was sort of implied. And then the first part is, it easier to use Harmony when SharePoint is set up with teams or using document libraries or something. So you want us to talk about that, Ron, a little bit?
Yeah, so I think just to add to what David was saying, when you create a team, you're basically being assigned, or under the hood, a SharePoint site collection is created. So from a Harmony standpoint, whether you organize it under one team or one site collection, or it's multiple site collections, multiple teams, or Harmony's going to get to it in the same manner. The key for me on that is, or the key differentiator for that is the way Harmony uses favorites. And favorites are something common to all tools today, but you can then drive or end users can work through a set of favorites where, I was showing an example the other day where some libraries were on an on-prem SharePoint site, some were on Teams, some were on under channels, and also it from a favorite standpoint, the end user then can dictate, okay, these are the places in SharePoint I use, and they don't have to deal with the complexity of where it actually resides. So I hope that answers the question.
Perfect. Okay, I'm going to answer one more and then we're going to close. We've been running behind the whole day, and it started with me, so I apologize for that. We'll get these questions answered and out to everybody, and then the offer is always out there. If we didn't cover something you wanted to hear about, to reach out to us directly, and we'll do something with you, or maybe we'll run this again. I feel like we were a little off, or I was a little off today anyway. So, the last question is about the scope. It says, what determines the scope of the aggregation of content in teams? And this is one of the kind of cool things about it is you determine it, right? It's the team, it could be about a project, it could be about organizational change management, it could be anything you want. Again, it's a kind of a very flexible application or user interface that sits on top of a group. So you get to define what is the team, what is the sort of overall purpose of this team, how are these people and how is this content connected, and then what are the channels to then subdivide the topics within a team. So you saw in that organizational change management, that was the team name, and then the channels had things like learning and documentation, and there were document templates and things like that for OCM. So you really get to define what gets aggregated, how it's contextualized, and you will have lots of teams. You might have one for each project group that's doing something, or a board or a committee, or all kinds of different uses. It kind of parallels a little bit the same way we use the Office 365 group itself, and of course that makes sense because Teams extends the group. Do you guys have anything to add to that, or are we good to wrap?
That's good.
Okay. All right. Thank you all for hanging on. If people are still alive for real out there, we still have 129 people out. So thank you for hanging out. And we'll be following up with an email with the recording and the presentation, and reach out to us if there was something that we missed that you want to talk about. And with that, we'll close it out, and thank you. Have a great rest of your week.
Great. Thanks all.
Bye-bye.